we're going to have to leave it there because the House is coming in for their legislative session. But I want to tell our viewers, if they're interested in Politico magazine, politico.com/magazine. You can also follow them on Twitter @PoliticoMag. Thank you very much, both of you, for being here. Appreciate it. And now, live coverage of the House.
The chair lays before the House a communication from the Speaker.
The Speaker's Rooms, Washington, D.C., December 4th, 2013. I hereby appoint the Honorable Paul Cook to act as Speaker pro tempore on this day. Signed, John A. Boehner, Speaker of the House of Representatives.
Pursuant to the order of the House of January 3rd, 2013, the House will now recognize members from lists submitted by the majority and minority leaders for morning hour debate. The chair will alternate recognition between the parties, with each party limited to 1 hour and each member other than the majority and minority leaders and the minority whip limited to 5 minutes. But in no event shall debate continue beyond 11:50 a.m. The chair recognizes the gentleman from North Carolina, Mr. Jones, for 5 minutes.
Mr. Speaker, thank you. Yesterday I came to the floor to speak about the bilateral strategic agreement and the fact that President Karzai has refused to sign the proposed offer by the administration. Since we have been in Afghanistan, 2,285 Americans have given their lives for our country and 19,514 have been wounded. The time has come for Congress to understand history. From the days of Alexander the Great to the British to the Russians, no one has ever changed Afghanistan. The American people are tired of the cost of war, both life and money. As I said yesterday, it is my hope that in early 2014, the leadership of the House will permit a debate and a vote on the agreement that will obligate our country to Afghanistan for at least 10 more years. I realize that the vote will not change the agreement because the President does have the authority, but this will give us a chance to represent the people of America who the majority are opposed to this agreement. It is unacceptable that we will continue to spend billions of dollars at a time. According to Special Inspector General John Sopko, the waste, fraud, and abuse is worse in Afghanistan today than it was 11 years ago. We in Congress continue to cut funding for programs for the American people, but we refuse to hold one single dollar from Karzai in Afghanistan. No wonder the American people have given Congress an approval rating of 9%. It is time to end the senseless waste of American lives and American money in Afghanistan. I want to thank Roger Simon for his editorial in today's Politico, and I would like to read the last paragraph of his editorial. He writes, and I quote, "Is this the neighborhood we want to stay in? Question mark. And fight for? Question mark. And throw more money at? Question mark. We have achieved our goals in Afghanistan. We have won. It is time for our troops to come home. If we stay for another decade, our good war could come to a very bad end." So again, Mr. Speaker, it is my hope that when we get into 2014 that both parties will come together and say that we need to debate on whether this agreement for 10 years is worth one life or $1. And I believe it will be a vigorous debate. I think it will be good that the American people can see that we hear them as it relates to this war in Afghanistan. Mr. Speaker, before I close, I've got a poster from the Greensboro News and Record dated February the 27th of 2011. It is the military carrying a flag-draped coffin off the back of a plane. How many more young Americans will have to go and walk the roads of Afghanistan and be killed and lose their limbs? I hope that my colleagues in both parties will join those of us in both parties who want to have this debate on Afghanistan in 2014. Mr. Speaker, I will close now by asking God to please bless our men and women in uniform, to bless the families of our men in uniform, and God to hold in his arms the families who've given a child dying for freedom in Afghanistan and Iraq. With that, Mr. Speaker, I will yield back the balance of my time.
Chair recognizes the gentleman from Oregon, Mr. Blumenauer, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. For as long as I've been in Congress, both parties and 2 successive administrations have danced around the issue of our infrastructure deficit. For all the attention to the various fiscal cliffs, the looming infrastructure deficit is every bit as critical. For 2 centuries, infrastructure was a bipartisan issue, from Lincoln with the Transcontinental Railroad to Democrats and Republicans coming together to launch the interstate freeway system signed into law by President Eisenhower. Subsequent roads, transit, and water investments helped fuel our economy and tie the nation together. More recently, the failure to address long-term funding has also been bipartisan. The Bush administration ignored strong recommendations from their own private sector experts that they impaneled to give advice. Although the Obama administration did request and employ some modest funding in the Recovery Act and has proposed an infrastructure bank and talked extensively and I think sincerely about the need for investment, what has been lacking has been a specific, concrete proposal from either party to address infrastructure financing in America. While the political maneuvering has occurred here in Washington, the gap in the Highway Trust Fund has been growing and conditions of our roads, bridges, and transit systems have been deteriorating. This puts America at a competitive disadvantage, complicates the movement of goods and people, and contributes to congestion and pollution. At the same time the needs grow, the resources are in significant decline. The gas tax has not been increased since the Clinton administration 20 years ago. The future prospects are even worse. Demands are increasing and deferred maintenance takes its toll while we watch the bottom fall out of the Highway Trust Fund. We've seen a slowdown in revenue due to the near collapse of the economy, a shift in driving patterns while people, especially young people, drive less, and improved fuel efficiency. It's scheduled to further reduce gas consumption dramatically with improved mileage for conventional vehicles, to say nothing of hybrids, plug-in hybrids, and electric vehicles. It's time for Congress to act. We've seen our partners at the state level increase transportation funding in 13 states, but they need Congress to act to maintain that partnership. There is a large coalition that stands ready to support Congress. The U.S. Chamber, the National AFL-CIO, building trades, trucking industry, numerous associations of small and medium businesses, local chambers of commerce, local government, professional organizations, bicyclists. The coalition is broad and persuasive, requesting Congress to tax them. Any resources would have a powerful effect on the economy. The relatively small amount in the Recovery Act for infrastructure created many jobs because there's a strong multiplier effect, about 36,000 jobs for each $1 billion invested. And these are family wage jobs all across America that aren't going to be outsourced overseas. In less than a year, the transportation bill expires, and absent congressional action, we face a precipitous drop in transportation funding, a reduction of 30% overall for the next decade. It doesn't need to be this way. I'm proposing we implement the 3-step 15-cent gallon tax increase that was part of the Simpson-Bowles deficit reduction proposals. Communities and industry need some certainty, especially for larger projects that are multi-state and multi-year. And this should be the last federal gas tax increase. Over the next 10 years, we need to replace funding for transportation that's based on gallons of fuel consumed, which is going to be declining, with something more sustainable. A reasonable adjustment now and a permanent fix in the future so we can stop this dance of avoidance. We will find broad support for this form of user fee, which historically has been acceptable to Republicans as well, including Ronald Reagan, who indeed increased the gas tax a nickel a gallon back when that was real money in 1982, and he established the Mass Transit Trust Fund account. Let's address the infrastructure deficit, stabilizing transportation funding, and help revitalize and enhance America's all-too-slow economic recovery. The time is now.
Chair recognizes the gentleman from Oklahoma, Mr. Langford, for 5 minutes.
I rise today for an admonition and a redirection, somewhat a philosophical conversation. America started with a great healthy reality of what government can do and what government cannot do. The government can't really control all of what's happening in every state from one central area. We began at the very beginning with individual states, individual local governments, individuals making decisions for their family. Right now we see in every poll, in every conversation that every one of us has, this great frustration that's rising among the American people. That frustration is not rising because the American vision, the American dream, and the American spirit is failing. That frustration is rising because somewhat of what we're doing and because of this constant challenge that is occurring nationwide to the concept of a representative republic. The constant asking of the question, has this become too gridlocked? Has it become too partisan? Has it become too hard to be able to get things done? Maybe we need to do it a different way. Quite frankly, the American people know in their hearts that they should be represented. They should be heard. Justice should be done. Trust should be here. Common sense should prevail. The basic principle among so many people that we should speak for those who cannot speak for themselves. That every American should be heard. It goes from the book of Proverbs to the very foundation of our constitutional system now. So what do we do about that? Well, around the world we see it. We see the frustration of other people in other countries. We see it in Syria as they're split up in a civil war. We see it in Cairo in the streets of yet another set of protests. We see in Thailand the absolute corruption of their government breaking out in things. We see votes in the parliament in the Ukraine right now as worldwide, continent by continent, there's constant frustration with their government, and people rise up in the streets. What do we do about it? How do we lead? We're the leaders in our country. So what do we do? Here's my quick admonition to us. Stop running down America and each other. We're different. We think different. We function different. Our families function different. But we should still be able to honor each other. We see each other's worst. We see on the social media sites, and we see on the press reports, and we see everything else. We know so much about each other that there's this sense that it's different now. But quite frankly, Americans have always been flawed people. But we're people that are gathered around our work, our faith, our community, and our family. And that's made us different. We've got to stop demeaning a representative republic. This constant statement of we're gridlocked and things aren't working implies to people all over the country maybe this system of government that made us the most powerful economy, the most powerful military, the greatest bastion for freedom the world has ever known, maybe it doesn't work anymore. The problem's not a representative republic. The problem's not our Constitution. The problem is we're trying to do something that's not that. We're shifting away from the way that we were founded into something that doesn't really exist. Quite frankly, the partisan gridlock is not something new. The patron saint of Oklahoma is Will Rogers. You can take every joke he made about Congress in the 1920s and pull it up to today, and it's still funny. Because things haven't changed on that, because quite frankly, we think different. But that's the nature of a country that's like ours. We have all these voices from all over the country that should come together and that should work together, but they should find us with solutions, not getting into their life and taking things over. They need to see a government that's thinking for them, not trying to make them the servant. They see it. Why did we have to vote this week about lead in fire hydrants? Isn't that a no-brainer issue? That government has become so strong and so powerful in communities that communities are not sure if they can replace their fire hydrants anymore. Why is it that Americans can't get insurance anymore? Because they're waiting on a government website and they're worried about what's going to happen in a month because they're waiting in line for that. Why is it that the education outcomes continue to decline when we increase federal control year after year after year, but yet our outcomes continue to decline? Even this week, another international poll coming out for that. Why is it getting harder and harder to start a company, find a job, pay your gas bill? Why is it tougher to fill up your car with gas or pay your bill for your cell phone? Is this increasing regulation, increasing fees, increasing control, and Americans continue to get frustrated because they know this is not what we were designed to be. We're doing too many things. We've got to get back to trusting the American people, our state leaders, our local leaders, and we've got to set the standard for what leadership looks like in America by our rhetoric and by our actions. We can honor people and honor each other, even in our differences. But we have got to get back to doing this nation's business the way that American people in their heart know it should be done, where their voices are heard, and where they get to make the decisions. With that, I yield back.
The chair recognizes the gentleman from California, Mr. Miller, for 5 minutes.
Speaker, I ask the members to address the House for 5 minutes and advise and extend my remarks.
Without objection.
Mr. Speaker, a year has passed since 112 garment workers, mostly women, were killed in a factory in Bangladesh that produced clothing for brands like Walmart, Sears, and Kmart. Earlier this year, I went to Bangladesh and met with women who leapt from the third and fourth windows of their factories to escape the fire. There's no good way to jump from that height, and the women who survived the fall were broken, crippled, and unable to support their children. Since the Tazreen fire, several brands have stepped up with payments for survivors, and yet some of the companies that were presumably profiting quite nicely from the production at the Tazreen factory have opted not to compensate a single victim. Walmart is one of those. They have chosen not to compensate a single woman who died in the factory, was crippled in the factory, had lost their job in the factory, all because of a fire of an unsafe factory. The Tazreen factory was known as a death trap. Windows were barred and the management locked the doors and the stairwells and left workers with no way to escape. Walmart knew this factory was a death trap. The company had commissioned a series of audits in 2011. Their audits uncovered that Tazreen was an overcrowded factory without proper fire alarms or smoke detectors, that it lacked sufficient firefighting equipment with partially blocked exits and stairwells, and did not post adequate evacuation plans. Because factory management failed to improve the conditions, Walmart terminated the contracts with the factory. However, Tazreen factory workers continued to produce for Walmart, even though they terminated their contract. According to documents found in the ashes, more than half of the factory's total production was dedicated to Walmart just 2 months before the collapse. So while Walmart left the factory because it was unsafe, over half of the production, according to the documents, was still for Walmart, knowing they were producing in an unsafe factory that claimed the lives of 112 women. Walmart now claims that the Tazreen factory was an unauthorized subcontractor. Half of the work in the factory was there because supposedly Walmart, whose hallmark of efficiency is their supply chain, didn't know their subcontractor was placing these very significant orders in a factory that they abandoned and was also owned overall by another company that they were doing business with. I think Walmart is trying to construct a process so that they can deny the responsibility for the deaths of the women, the responsibility to pay maybe a benefit to those families who were crushed by the loss of their breadwinner, their mother, their sister, their wife. It's time to accept that responsibility. And when Walmart terminated direct contracts at the factory, it never told the workers that it was leaving or why it was leaving. In a recent public forum, Walmart said the only responsibility was to notify the factory owner. But that's like notifying a criminal that you're aware of his crime while you keep his next potential victim in the dark. Workers had no reason to suspect that Walmart walked away due to safety concerns because Walmart garments still dominated the production there. By quietly walking away and failing to tell anybody who could remedy the danger, workers, trade associations, or the government, Walmart left the Tazreen vulnerable to a fire that would engulf them. The Walmart actions were calibrated to evade responsibility, and they put those women at risk. The pattern of evasion was repeated at Rana Plaza, where over 1,132 workers, again, mostly women, were killed in the factory collapse earlier this year. Walmart claims it did not permit production there, but evidence found in the rubble of that collapsed factory shows that Rana Plaza was producing jeans for Walmart less than a year before the collapse. There is a theme here. When tragedies occur, Walmart claims production was not authorized as a way to disown responsibility. But every brand sourcing garment from Bangladesh knows the extensive subcontracting is part of the business model. That is how fast fashion is produced. You can cut your direct dealings with the specific factory, but there's a chance someone in your supply chain is going to subcontract right back to that factory. The ethics are not complicated. The United Nations Principles on Business and Human Rights call upon multinationals to conduct due diligence through the many layers of their supply chains where the risk is the greatest and to identify, mitigate, and prevent the problems. Had Walmart done that, maybe 1,000 women would be alive today and not have a factory collapse on them. Maybe 112 women would be alive today. Maybe those women who had to jump out of the third and fourth window to survive the fire would not be crippled today, would be able to support their families and live somewhat of a normal life. Audits don't absolve companies of responsibilities. If terminating a contract could lead to even greater harm, there is a special obligation, according to these recognized principles of the United Nations, to stay and remedy the problem. Brands have an obligation to both audit working conditions and to help remedy the risk of the most vulnerable in their supply chain. Walmart, accept responsibility and start doing business in a humane way.
Chair recognizes the gentleman from Alabama, Mr. Brooks, for 5 minutes.
Mr. Speaker, the Science, Space, and Technology Committee recently held a hearing on healthcare.gov cybersecurity threats. Our bipartisan expert witness panel included Dr. Frederick Chang, a computer science professor at SMU, Dr. Aviel Rubin, a computer science professor at Johns Hopkins University, David Kennedy, former chief security officer of Diebold Incorporated and currently the principal security consultant for TrustedSec, and Morgan Wright, formerly with Cisco Security and now CEO of Crowdsourced Investigations. Now, I'm not a cybersecurity expert, but I can read the words of those who are. The SST Committee's hearing charter informs members that, in order to fully use healthcare.gov, American citizens must input or verify highly personal information such as date of birth and Social Security numbers for all family members, household salary, debt information, credit card information, place of employment, home addresses, and the like. Information that is a treasure trove for cyber criminals and identity thieves. Further, the Obamacare website interacts with the IRS and Social Security Administration databases, thereby exposing Americans to even greater risk of theft of their most private, personal information. In their written testimony, these experts warn the following about the healthcare.gov website. Quote, there are clear indicators that even basic security was not built into the healthcare.gov website, end quote. Quote, the vast amount of healthcare.gov code also means applying industry standard security practices is a task that can have no real chance of success, end quote. Healthcare.gov, quote, creates massive opportunity for fraud, scams, deceptive trade practices, identity theft, and more, end quote. Mr. Speaker, these threats to American family finances prompted me to ask the panel of cybersecurity experts whether, under Obamacare, Americans can seek compensation from the federal government for financial losses caused by use of healthcare.gov. In reply, not one expert, not one, indicated Obamacare requires the federal government to compensate American citizens for cybersecurity financial losses caused by their forced use of the healthcare.gov website. If these experts are right, and if you're an American citizen who obeys Obamacare dictates, and you suffer from identity theft or other financial losses, the White House response is essentially, tough luck. You are on your own. Well, that's unsatisfactory and unacceptable. I next asked the bipartisan panel of experts, quote, given healthcare.gov security issues and assuming for the moment that you would be personally responsible for all damages incurred, if any, from your advice, would any of you advise an American citizen to use this website as the security issues now exist? Their bipartisan response was a stunning and unanimous no. Do not use the website because the security risks associated with healthcare.gov are simply too great. Mr. Speaker, the Obamacare website, healthcare.gov, is the mother lode for identity theft, internet fraud, and other criminal activity. For emphasis, Mr. Speaker, a bipartisan panel of cybersecurity experts publicly warns that the healthcare.gov cybersecurity threat is so great that no one should use it. Based on their expert advice, I concur and encourage all Americans to avoid healthcare.gov, the Obamacare website, in any way, shape, or form until its cybersecurity risks are fixed. Mr. Speaker, I yield back.
The chair recognizes the gentlewoman from Texas, Ms. Jackson Lee, for 5 minutes.
Mr. Speaker, with a lot of enthusiasm, I rise to recognize and to acknowledge a Renaissance man, a man with a sense of humor, along with his wife, Yvette, determined to help to make the lives of children around the world much better. Yes, he had a sense of humor, and he was also a musician. And he visualized a day without hunger, hoping for it to be December 31st, 2013. Yank Berry has many sides to him, but enthusiastically he takes each challenge, some that he's overcome in life, and put on the boxing gloves and simply won. I'm excited that he joined in partnership with Gary U.S. Bonds and Muhammad Ali to form the Global Village Champions Foundation, not just for boxing, but really to take boxers and box the troubles of the world away. In the course of his work, he has served over almost 1 billion meals, 954 million, on his way to 1 billion. He also doesn't take no for an answer in working to release 5 Bulgarian nurses and a Palestinian in Libya a few years ago. Not an easy task. And so, along with his 30-year music career, jamming with Jimi Hendrix, writing jingles, and yes, singing with the Kingsmen of Louie Louie fame, we can be grateful that he and his wife Yvette turned to a very important challenge, the Global Village Champions Foundation, which strives to become the undisputed world leader in private humanitarian delivery of nutrition to needy persons everywhere, sustaining human life and helping to eradicate hunger from the face of the earth. As someone who's worked with the Congressional Children's Caucus, it excites me to note that he continues to provide continued support for the children that we are already supplying with meals and other necessities. He expands the Global Village Champions team to include people with diverse skills and a determination to make a difference in the world. For more than 17 years, he's joined with his friends Muhammad Ali, Gary U.S. Bonds. They haven't boxed, they haven't sung, but they've worked to put a light in the darkness of lives of so many. His career has expanded many aspects. He even wrote jingles. He even was able to put forward a unique form of music. But I would say that one of his greatest challenges and greatest successes is that everywhere he goes, he takes his product that he has developed, VitaPro, and he changes the hearts and minds of those who are suffering. He started donating some of his food product to various charities and NGOs in Canada and the U.S. Soon, Yank's dear friend Muhammad, as I indicated, joined the Global Village, and they brought food, medical supplies, clothing, and educational tools to refugee camps and orphanages in areas stricken by disaster all over the world, from Africa to Bulgaria to places beyond our imagination. As well, he worked with those like Celine Dion, Michael Jordan, Buzz Aldrin, and many others. As a result of his ongoing fight against hunger, Mr. Berry has received nearly 24 awards since 1995, including the India Humanitarian Service Award, the Bahamian Red Cross Humanitarian Award, Cote d'Ivoire Humanitarian Award, Juarez, Mexico, Hands of Love, and it goes on and on and on. He does not do this for the awards. He does this for the simplicity of going into Bulgaria, where those fleeing from the oppression of Syria were in camps that were not ready for humankind. Because of his frustration and because of his heart, decided to look for hotels that he could lease to move some of these desperate Syrian refugees, already oppressed, already having lost loved ones, to hotels with clean running water and places for their family to be. As I chatted with him, I was moved by the story of the family of 17. Didn't think anything of it, to move them out of a room smaller than a classroom and to give them space in this hotel so that they could live in dignity. Maybe even think of going back to a Syria that would be free from oppression and devastation. And so it is good that with his roots in our neighboring country, Canada, he came here to the United States to make a difference. I'm delighted today to recognize Mr. Yank Berry for his humanitarian service to all of the world, and to be able to say to him, well done in life, continue to serve and save others. I yield back.
The chair recognizes the gentleman from Nebraska, Mr. Fortenberry, for 5 minutes.
Mr. Speaker, I ask unanimous consent to revise and extend my remarks.
Without objection.
Mr. Speaker, it's been said that there's nothing that's wrong in America that can't be fixed by what's right in America. Now, clearly there are very significant difficulties in this body. There is turmoil in our health care system. The paralysis in Washington, a sluggish economy, our fractured culture are all lending themselves to a search for deeper meaning, for ideals, for something to cling to. Well, Mr. Speaker, we're quite fortunate where I live in Nebraska to maintain a strong tradition and connection to the past, which gives guidance for the time in which we live. But we don't often reflect upon our strength. And in the final analysis, it really is this. It's our land, it's our people, and it's our values. Recently, in the heart of farm country, I had the pleasure of speaking with very attentive and engaged high school students eager to discuss the issues before our nation. We discussed the proud history of our country, the Declaration of Independence, the ties that continue to define us as a nation, and the debates that will define us as to where we go as a country. Mr. Speaker, an essential part of regaining our balance as a nation is to understand, celebrate, and enhance America's rural heritage. As Americans are more and more removed from farm life, we don't think about the contribution that rural life makes to the country as a whole. Production agriculture remains a key strength of America's economy, and exciting new opportunities are also emerging. Expanding domestic food markets, such as those for natural and organic foods grown within local food systems, provide new opportunities for young and beginning farmers. There is also a new bio-based economy that converts, for instance, corn cobs to pop bottles and livestock waste to electricity, while bringing about a new kind of American manufacturing based upon the resources of rural communities. Another notable point is this, Mr. Speaker. Young men and women from rural areas of America serve in the military in much more significant numbers. Farm policy has an important role in growing new opportunities in rural America. Mr. Speaker, we need to pass a farm bill. The arduous process of reconciling the House and Senate versions of the farm legislation is now taking place. but it is important for all Americans to understand that the Farm Bill is not just about farms or food, but it is also a jobs bill, a trade bill, an energy bill, a conservation bill, and even a national security bill. 1 out of every 12 jobs in the United States is related to agriculture. In the House version of the bill, I strongly support initiatives that help beginning farmers and ranchers start their agricultural operations. I support initiatives to promote the development of local foods markets, tighten payment limitations, and enact reasonable reforms to the SNAP program while also protecting those with food security needs. I'm hopeful that the final bill written will retain the important reforms that actually help save taxpayer money and ensure farmers receive important risk management tools. Mr. Speaker, a recent University of Nebraska survey showed that a majority of students desire to move home to their rural hometowns given the right opportunity to provide for themselves and raise a family. In recent years, our state, through hard work, personal responsibility, and responsible governance, has distinguished itself as an ideal place to live and to work and to raise a family. More than any one piece of legislation, these are the deeper values that we need to nurture and protect. Those of us in farm country have a great story to tell. We have the resources and sensible stewardship to use them responsibly. We have a great tradition of values that keeps us tethered to an honorable past, which also serves as a guide for the future. And Mr. Speaker, I believe this will help America find her way. I yield back.
The chair recognizes the gentleman from Puerto Rico, Mr. Pierre Luisi, for 5 minutes.
Mr. Speaker, over the last several months, the press has been filled with stories about the severe economic problems in the U.S. territory of Puerto Rico. These economic problems have aggravated social problems like crime, have generated anxiety for individuals and institutions that have invested in Puerto Rico's bonds, and have caused island residents to relocate to the 50 states in unprecedented numbers. The statistics are staggering. In recent years, Puerto Rico's population has fallen by more than 4%, while the number of Puerto Ricans living in the states has increased by over 45%. As Puerto Rico's representative in Congress, it pains me to read media accounts of the island's troubles, especially because I know that my constituents are just as capable and industrious as their fellow citizens in any other U.S. jurisdiction. Puerto Rico has enormous potential, but the reality is that this potential is not being fulfilled. Although the island's problems have certainly grown worse in recent months, it is critical for policymakers and the American public to understand that these problems are not of recent vintage. To the contrary, for at least 4 decades, Puerto Rico's economic performance and, by extension, quality of life on the island has been far worse than any state according to every indicator, including unemployment, average household income, and the ratio of government debt to economic production. In other words, Puerto Rico's difficulties have endured in more or less the same form, regardless of who holds power in Washington and San Juan, and irrespective of the public policies they formulate. To be sure, fiscal mismanagement at the local level and insufficient attention at the federal level have both been factors contributing to Puerto Rico's problems, but the record clearly establishes that they're not the main factor. What, then, is the principal source of Puerto Rico's long-standing woes? In a recent editorial, the Washington Post correctly identified the culprit, noting that the territory's economic problems are structural, traceable ultimately to its muddled political status. Curiously, the Post then asserted that there will be time enough to debate the status issue later, and that Puerto Rico, for the time being, should concentrate in fixing its finances. As I observed in a letter to the Post's editor, this is like a doctor recommending medicine to alleviate a patient's symptoms, but doing nothing to treat the underlying disease. As long as Puerto Rico remains a territory deprived of equal treatment under critical federal spending and tax credit programs, forced to borrow heavily to make up the difference, and lacking the ability to vote for the President and members of Congress who make our national laws, the island will be in a position merely to manage rather than surmount its economic problems. This is the only reasonable conclusion to draw from decades of empirical evidence. A majority of my constituents understand this, which is why they voted to reject territory status in a referendum held 1 year ago. The Obama administration recognizes this as well, which is why it proposed the first federally sponsored status vote in Puerto Rico's history to resolve the issue once and for all. And finally, members of Congress from both parties comprehend this, which is why 125 of them have co-sponsored legislation I introduced that provides for an up or down vote in Puerto Rico on the territory's admission as a state and outlines the steps the federal government will take if a majority of voters favor admission. There are many reasons to oppose Puerto Rico's territory status, which is unequal, undemocratic, and un-American. One of the most important reasons why Puerto Rico must discard this status in favor of either statehood or nationhood is because the current status has failed and will continue to fail to provide the island's 3.6 million American citizens with the economic opportunities and the quality of life they deserve. Those who refuse to acknowledge this fundamental truth for ideological reasons are doing a great disservice to the people of Puerto Rico. They are on the wrong side of history. Thank you.
The chair recognizes the gentleman from Pennsylvania, Mr. Thompson, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, there has been much documented and published about the problems resulting from the Affordable Health Care Act. Millions of Americans are waking up to the cancellation of health insurance policies and that they've depended on to meet their family's needs at an affordable price. Skyrocketing premiums and deductible increases under the pressures of paying for coverage mandates that they do not want, they cannot afford, and even may have a moral objection to. Now, one area that has received little attention so far in this debate is what the impact will be on our hospitals, where much of the needed health care is provided by caring and competent professionals. Now, as a healthcare professional that served in rural hospitals for nearly 30 years as a therapist and a manager, I'm confident that the future of rural and underserved urban hospitals is not good under the pressures and the mandates of Obamacare. While some point to tens of millions of Americans who were uninsured now having some type of coverage, a plus for the bottom line of hospitals, I would encourage a closer and more thoughtful look. First, the CBO has estimated that even after full implementation, there will still be tens of millions of Americans uninsured. Based on the current reports from across America, this may include a lot of middle-class Americans who find themselves for the first time unable to afford what Obamacare has dictated. For a hospital, that assures the continuation of bad debt and charity care that hampers their balance sheets. For lower-income individuals now insured under expanded medical assistance, it is true that hospitals will be paid, but they're going to be paid 40 to 60 cents for every dollar of care that they provide. Not exactly a sustainable margin, and more accurately, a pathway to bankruptcy for hospitals when coupled with the newfound population of uninsured. Mix this with the cost of compliance that will be rolling out from the Obama administration of the approximately 130 new regulatory agencies founded under the Obamacare legislation. Today, the cost of compliance with government mandates, including Medicare billing and HIPAA, just those two, account for a significant part of any hospital's overhead expenses. Multiply this by 100, under the yet-to-be-administered mandates and cost of care that will have a dramatic increase just to keep the doors open and the lights on for every hospital. The human resources cost of providing health care coverage for hospitals whose #1 asset is a qualified and trained employee will increase as the Obamacare employer mandate is finally implemented just a year from now. Now, finally, consider the fees or taxes imposed on hospitals in 2014, just weeks away. Earlier this week, a hospital CEO from my congressional district reported that, quote, "We're going to have to pay close to $200,000 next year, as will every hospital," end quote. Hospitals will see other various fees, including a $5,000 levy, so the government can do research on the effectiveness of hospitals working within the plan. Additionally, hospitals will pay a $19,500 health insurance fee and a $160,000 transitional reinsurance fee that will go into the pot to protect insurance companies against the risk of winding up with numerous high-risk customers. These are added costs for the hospitals that Americans rely on for the access to health care. I have to wonder what now is so affordable about the Affordable Care Act. Bankrupt hospitals serve no one. Americans deserve better. Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I yield back the balance of my time.
The chair recognizes the gentlewoman from Connecticut, Ms. DeLauro, for 5 minutes.
Mr. Speaker, 27 years ago, I was diagnosed with ovarian cancer. I was lucky. I had excellent doctors who detected the cancer by chance in stage 1. I underwent radiation treatment for 2.5 months. And because of the grace of God and biomedical research, I stand here today. And I am fortunate to say that I have been cancer-free ever since. I can tell you for a fact that access to preventive health care saved my life. If my ovarian cancer had not been diagnosed and caught in stage 1, I might not be here today. But many women are not so lucky. Over 15,000 die every year from ovarian cancer. And while I survived by that off chance of luck in that diagnosis, no one should have to survive by luck. Which is why my Democratic colleagues and I worked hard. We worked very hard to make sure that prevention and wellness are such a critical part of the Affordable Care Act. And before we passed this transformative piece of legislation, 1 in 5 women over age 50 had not had a mammogram in the past 2 years, mostly because they could not afford one. Now mammograms are covered. They're covered for all Americans with no out-of-pocket costs. So are annual checkups, colonoscopies, diabetes, and other cancer screenings. At no cost, let me repeat that. They are the beneficiaries of life-saving treatments, preventive care. This not only helps to keep Americans healthier, it also helps to drive down the cost of health care so that people can get access to the services that they need. Chronic and often preventable diseases such as heart disease and diabetes cause 7 out of 10 deaths in the United States of America, and they account for 75% of our health spending. Preventive care can help Americans avoid these ailments or catch them before it is too late. That is what the Affordable Care Act does. That's what the people of this country need to know, that there are countless story after story after story of people's lives being saved because they have the opportunity to get a treatment or a something that says you may be at risk for a particular disease. And you can get that identification not by luck, but as a routine checkup. No one in the United States of America should survive by luck. Now we have an opportunity through the Affordable Care Act, which is the law of the land today, to make sure that everyone, man and woman, can get those services. So if you expand access to preventive health, it drives the cost down, but most importantly, it saves lives. And isn't that worth doing, is to be able to save someone's life. That's what the Affordable Care Act is all about, and it is just one of the many ways that it is good for men, for women, for families in this nation. And it's good for America to move in this direction. I yield back the balance of my time.
The chair recognizes the gentlewoman from Ohio, Ms. Kaptur, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. So here's a Jeopardy question for you. How many days is the Republican majority now overdue in getting its work done to produce a budget for the nation for 2014? Our nation needs a budget to operate the government of the United States for the upcoming year. And by law, April 15th was the deadline by which the budget was to have been completed. But that hasn't happened. Now it's December 4th. So that means that their bill is 234 days overdue. In fact, technically, the federal fiscal year began October 1st. The majority's bill is actually 7 months and 20 days overdue. A parking ticket that old might land you in jail. Not making your car payments for 7 months might likely result in your car being repossessed. Right? The Budget Committee is supposed to finish its one bill, by April 15th. But they just can't seem to find a way to do it. Then, if they were to have done that, the Appropriations Committee, which depends on the Budget Committee for a total budget number, could get its work done to produce not just one, but 12 bills it is mandated to move through passage to run the federal departments of the government of the United States of America. Everything from the Forest Service to veterans clinics to the Social Security Administration, department after department. The American people are waiting for this House, led by the Republican majority, to get the job done of producing the 2014 budget. America doesn't need any more beauty pictures of committee chairs prancing and posturing in front of cameras. They need to go into the committee rooms and get the work done. The majority is 234 days overdue. Tomorrow, it will be 235 days overdue. My goodness, there are only 26 days left in this calendar year. Even Santa Claus must be shaking his head in disbelief. Talk about running the ship of state aground. Let the majority produce the budget bill. It's way over time. Don't hold up our republic anymore. You're 234 days overdue, and we're all counting. Mr. Speaker, I yield back my remaining time.
The chair recognizes the gentlewoman from Wisconsin, Ms. Moore, for 5 minutes.
Thank you so much, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I rise today to implore you and the House majority to reach across the aisle to find common ground, to reach out their hands to fix our broken immigration system. Mr. Speaker, last summer, Republicans and Democrats in the Senate came together and passed comprehensive immigration reform with a strong bipartisan vote, a vote of 68 to 32. 68 to 32. That's like a super-duper majority. And in fact, one poll last month showed that 63% of Americans, two-thirds of Americans, support a path to citizenship for undocumented immigrants. Business leaders, chambers of commerce, labor unions, faith groups, immigrant families, law enforcement officials, and Americans of every race, creed, color, and ethnicity all across our country applauded our senators for reaching across the aisle. For many, it really gave hope and belief in our government that we're still capable of putting aside political posturing and to build consensus around the difficult issues that faced our country. But today, as I speak, Americans are asking, what happened? They're confused as to why the House of Representatives can't do the same thing that the Senate did and pass immigration reform. They are even more confused as to why the House can't even dignify the issue with a simple up or down vote. And those people have not gone away, Mr. Speaker. Oh, no. In fact, today the call to action is still as loud and clear as it has ever been. Just yesterday, I visited the Fast for Families movement on the National Mall, where faith leaders had actually been fasting for 22 days, 22 days with no food. Some were hospitalized to safely break the fast per the doctor's orders, but others pressed on. Replacement fasters stepped up, including our own Representative Kennedy, who, in the legacy of his grandfather, Bobby, acknowledged the need to embrace the immigrant issue. So I ask my colleagues in the majority on the other side of the aisle, what are we waiting for? Our job creators want reform. Our workforce wants it. Our spiritual leaders say it's the right thing to do. And overwhelmingly so do the American people. The facts are so clear that reform will tremendously benefit all of our country. In fact, the Congressional Budget Office has followed the money, and they estimate that immigration reform will increase gross domestic product by $700 billion in 2023 and $1.4 trillion in 2033. But here we are today, facing government shutdowns and sequester levels that eviscerate services so that many vulnerable Americans rely on, and this is where we're stuck. It's been 5 months since the Senate passed their bill, and yet we have only 6 days scheduled until the end of the year, and we haven't had one serious vote on immigration reform. Americans have put their differences aside for the common good of our country, and they expect us to do the same thing in this, our beloved democracy. Once again, I want to reiterate that I stand here ready to work with my colleagues on the other side of the aisle to move our country forward. And I applaud my brave colleagues on the other side that have already taken a stand and put politics aside. And I encourage more of my colleagues to answer that calling and meet us halfway. The American people are fed up with the status quo and gridlock here in Washington. Let's come together and strengthen our business, our economy, our workforce, and our families. I yield back the balance of my time.
The chair recognizes the gentlewoman from Illinois, Ms. Bustos, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise today to talk about a piece of legislation I will be introducing that will help put our brave veterans back to work in good-paying jobs in the communities across our country. It is called the Jobs for Heroes Act. Good for vets and good for the economy. It would extend and expand 2 tax credits for businesses that prioritize hiring veterans. Both of these tax credits are set to expire at the end of the month without congressional action. The time to act is now. Last month, I traveled to all corners of my district to meet with local veterans to listen to their priorities and to their concerns. I also hosted an economic summit attended by roughly 200 people who I am here to serve. This was all about jobs and all about the economy. And this is also about our veterans. Making sure veterans have access to good-paying jobs came up everywhere I went, from Pekin to Peoria, Rock Island to Rockford, and literally everywhere I went. Legislation to help prioritize the hiring of veterans is especially crucial due to the high unemployment rate of young veterans. Veterans between the ages of 18 and 24 have an unemployment rate of more than 20%. That's 5% higher than non-veterans of the same age. That is absolutely shameful. I hope all members of Congress will join me in supporting my common sense bill to help put veterans back to work and to making sure that those who have served always remain a priority. Good for veterans, good for the economy, and good for America. Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I yield back.
The chair recognizes the gentleman from California, Mr. Swalwell, for 5 minutes.